Hello from Dovecot Studios. Actually here in the studios today. It's a beautiful day in Edinburgh. So we'll be talking a little bit about the building that I'm sitting in today. But just to give you a bit of context about me, I'm not a weaver nor an artist, but I have worked with both in my career. So I trained as a historian, which included working alongside craftspeople and artists, designers and architects at the Royal College of Art in London. And at the time that I joined the Royal College of Art, it was in the early 1990s when the UK had entered a recession, and the importance of acquiring explicit and tacit skills of making work seemed to be on the agenda, not only important but necessary. And it feels that at this moment in time where we're talking a lot about AI, but also the need to be able to create things in the real world. And so it feels that there's a sort of moment for that again. So if we take us down, here we are in Edinburgh. And just if you have any questions while I'm talking, you can put them into the chat and then I'll be able to answer them towards the end. Later today, we've actually got an in-person tour going around the balcony. So you actually get a little bit more time, but I'll be going up to do that just after we finish speaking. So today's sort of studio tour focuses on textiles and tapestry and how we increase the visibility of both at Dovecot Studios in this city, in Scotland, and hopefully internationally too. So this is where we've been based for the last 10 years. If you see this little building where I've put the cursor, that's the sort of main quad of the University of Edinburgh, and Dovecot is just on Infirmary Street, right in the heart of what we call the Old Town. This picture is taken from Carlton Hill in the New Town. And so that was where the photograph was taken from, and we were looking across. And here in the Old Town of Edinburgh, we've got the National Museums of Scotland, but we've also got this stretch from Edinburgh Castle that runs all the way down what they call the Royal Mile to the Palace of Holyrood House. And only 10 minutes from the city, from the station. And this is our building. It was designed by Robert Moran, and the Infirmary Street Baths were the first public baths in Edinburgh. They were built in 1885, and that followed a cholera epidemic. And the Infirmary Street Baths, as they were called, helped to keep the Old Town of Edinburgh clean. So you've got a new part to the building here, and also on top of the baths, and I'll make that more explicit when I show you the baths as they were when they were acquired by the Dovecot Foundation. So here you can see this is the roof light under where I'm sitting at the moment. So the studios are right in the sort of back of the building. And then in order to try and make this a mixed economy, we called it, space, there were a number of extra elements added to the building, which allow us to rent it out. You can even get married on the studio floor, and to try and generate income with which to support our tapestry weaving. And as I said, it was a bathhouse, and as part of being able to come get changed, you can see those cubicles, and have a bath, you could also exercise in the pool. Distinctively, we had ladies' baths and men's baths. A lot of public bathhouses have, even today, different days on which you can attend if you don't want to go on a mixed session. And back in the studios, it was refurbished and reopened to the public in 2008. So I mentioned Holyrood House, which is from where I'm sitting, sort of just over in that direction. And this was the seat for the royal family. It still is, and of government a long time ago in the city. And the royal collection has one of the great collections of tapestries. You might know that Charles I, so right back at the beginning of the 17th century, had a passion to become one of these great sort of continental princes. And that meant he was trying to copy people like Henry IV in France and have his own tapestry studio, which he then set up and acquired famously the Raphael cartoons that Raphael had designed for the tapestries that hang below Michelangelo's ceiling in the Sistine Chapel. Those cartoons now hang in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. But just as an example of how tapestry was a very aspirational art form, it was the finest of the fine arts. And if you were anyone great and you wanted to demonstrate your learning, you would commission a tapestry. But tapestries over time, in the medieval period, long before painting was the art form that it became during the Renaissance, there were sort of imagery, and a good place to go and see tapestry in Scotland is also not just at Holyrood, but at the Burrell collection. And William Burrell, who was a great sort of Scottish industrialist, but who spent his money on art and then gave it to the nation, providing that a museum was built to house it, spent much more money on tapestry than on anything else. And he was competing with the likes of William Randolph Hearst and other industrialists in America in the early 20th century. And the tapestries that he collected were more of a medieval nature, where you had very different imagery. Here you've got, in this panel from a series of Brussels tapestries, the planets. You've got Mars embracing Venus, and you've got sort of Jupiter, who's up here throwing thunderbolts from the sky. So this is quite a different type of imagery to those that were popular in the medieval period, where there's one tapestry in the Burrell collection where it shows the sort of the wine grape pickers and the people making wine. So showing people doing ordinary things rather than gods and planets. This is a building called Mount Stuart. It's a fantastic place to visit on the Isle of Bute, which is on the west coast of Scotland. They have a contemporary art programme. It's home to the Bute family. But in the late 19th century, the original house burnt down. Some parts of it are still there. And the Bute family commissioned this incredible sort of Scottish, a little bit baronial, but sort of arts and crafts building. And it was in that spirit that the Dovecot Tapestry Studio was created in the early 20th century by the Bute family. Interestingly, in the same year that Mount Stuart was completed, 1879, William Morris designed and wove his very first tapestry himself. He was the sort of person that could finish a day at work. He was a very successful business person, William Morris, and go home and weave a tapestry. And this is a design that was made in 1879. Morris, who is important to Dovecot because we're founded in that arts and crafts spirit of reviving hand and medieval fine craft skills in the late 19th, early 20th century, believed that the imagery for tapestry should be rooted back in those medieval ideals. And interestingly, he called himself, as well, he was part of a group called the Pre-Raphaelites. So he wanted to get back before Raphael and what was felt as quite a sort of staged, false representation of history and the past into something more authentic. And this is an example of a tapestry that he designed with John Henry Durrell. And John Henry Durrell, when Morris died, was the person, along with May Morris, who was appointed to run Morris & Co. We had an exhibition about Morris & Co. Wallpapers start of 2022, and John Henry Durrell is this. It's hard to find images of him, clearly a very industrious, hardworking person, but not a self-publicist. And this would be another example of the sort of tapestry that Morris believed in, the idea of creating the chase. So people talk now a lot about immersive art experiences. And for Morris, the idea that you could be sitting in a room with all four walls surrounding you with tapestries on them, putting you sort of in media res in the middle of the forest was his ideal of how tapestry should be and could be used to enhance an experience in an environment. So back to Dovecot. Dovecot was founded in 1912, so we're not centuries old, but we do therefore fit into a slightly different narrative to, say, the Gobelin, which is the historic tapestry studio, which is in the centre of Paris, which was founded back in the 16th century. And here we've got the early Dovecot Weavers, and you might notice that they are all men. Today, we actually have more women weavers than men, but here on the loom, this is from the 1940s. You've got a tapestry being woven of Graham Sutherland, the birds, and in the centre, those of you who know Dovecot well might know the figure of Archie Brennan, who trained as an apprentice at Dovecot and went on to become a hugely important figure in tapestry in the 20th century, in that he took off from Scotland and travelled the world, but spent time in Australia, setting up the Australian tapestry workshops there, and then also travelling and working in places like Hawaii, and finally in North America, where he died a couple of years ago. So this is the team today, and we have, as you can see, we've got 6 weavers. We have Naomi Robertson, who is the head of the studios, and we have 3 of our weavers are what we call master weavers, which means that they've trained for over and worked at Dovecot for over 10 years. This is one of our most famous projects of recent years, which was a huge set, 3 tapestries that Dovecot chose Chris Ofili to work with on. They were commissioned for the Clothworkers Company, which is a very important medieval guild in London. And the Clothworkers had reached out to Dovecot and very kindly offered to see how they might support the studios. If it was difficult for Charles I to run a tapestry studio, it's not necessarily any easier today. And in discussion with the Clothworkers, they agreed to commission a set of tapestries for their hall in London. And originally, they had lots of ideas about who might collaborate with Dovecot to design them. And that ultimately led to Chris Ofili being chosen. The studios, we keep in touch with artists all the time. There are lots of people that the artistic team here would love to work with, to translate their ideas into woven form. And Chris was one of those artists who the studio team wanted to work with. And this is the tapestries as they were installed at the National Gallery. So through Chris's studio team and gallery, he had an invitation to create work at the National Gallery, and that led to the tapestry being the subject of an exhibition called weaving magic. That was back in 2017, and it became the subject of a documentary that the BBC have sometimes rerun, which was part of the Imagine programme, which gives you an insight into the making. You can see here that the original design for the tapestry is really quite small. It's on the three pieces of paper. It's a watercolour with elements of charcoal, and it was translated at huge scale. So if you see the original, if you hear Chris speaking about the tapestry, one of his ideas was that he wanted to make it as difficult as possible and to challenge the weavers to recreate water. But actually that is something that the weavers really quite enjoy doing. But you can see how at detail, his water sort of bleeds and moves with the pigments and sparks of charcoal on the page. And then when I show how the weavers translated this at scale, it's got, you know, a huge amount of sort of incidental marks that an artist might make, where they're not focused necessarily on that detail of how one pigment bleeds into another. And then what the studio team do is to trace the marks of the artist on what is later called the cartoon. And so they have the advantage these days of using acetate that will be placed on top of the original design. So I'm just trying to find the cursor to move this forward. And then the tapestry will be warped up, and those incidental marks will be put with pen, a permanent marker, onto each individual warp. So the cartoon is held behind the loom. I'm going to show you this process a couple of times with another tapestry, so but you're welcome to ask any questions. So you can see there the marks on the warps, and the whole design doesn't get marked up, just the amount that weavers can reach to. And then you can see how that is being, I mean, it's incredible, isn't it, when you see those sort of how the ink has skimmed the surface of the paper and how that is being translated at scale. And one of the things tapestry, we do make some quite small tapestries, but one of the things tapestry can work beautifully with is translating somebody's idea into a huge scale. So it sits in that sort of more architectural context, which an artist wouldn't necessarily be able to translate their work and recreate it at that scale themselves. Here you've got the initials, so CO, Chris O'Feely, the Dovecot symbol, Jonathan Cleaver, Emma Jo Webster, and Louise Trotter, and this was the second tapestry in the triptych, and that gets turned over at the end of the weaving. And then here we've had a cutting off process just last week actually, but this was such a big tapestry that it took a little longer. And you can see that this was being filmed, but there we've got Chris, who's cutting the tapestry from the loom. Traditionally, it can be a woman that cuts a tapestry, but for the Dovecot Weavers, it's never them. They would always prefer to have somebody else. There's a little bit of sort of luck in terms of finishing. And that's the first time when that comes off the loom that the weavers get to see the work that they might have woven on a huge tapestry even a year ago or more, and it gets turned down as they weave so that they're all weaving at the same level. And this is the tapestry being installed at the National Gallery in London, and there it is on the wall. And Chris created a wonderful backdrop for the tapestry, which he had scenery painters from the Royal Opera House create. So this is the tapestry, Leon Kossoff and Dovecot, that we kept us going in the pandemic. So it's a commission from an organisation called Parabola, which is a property developer. They have a big property development in London called King's Place, famously, I think, where The Guardian is based. But also they've developed terrific space in Edinburgh Park in the city, which is a new live-work area to the west of the city, not so far from the airport. And they wanted to, again, it was in part support Dovecot, but also create something of note for their main building. And they had a very strong idea of the work that they wanted us to translate, a painting by Leon Kossoff. So just to show you, these are some of the original drawings that Kossoff made of a painting that hangs in the National Gallery, London. Again, another connection there. And this is Kossoff's painting, but this was the original painting by Rubens that he studied. And it's called Minerva Protects Pax from Mars. So again, speaks to all of those tropes of tapestry from the sort of more the 17th, 18th century in sort of dealing with important sort of gods and sort of mythical figures. And you've got quite a lot going on in this painting, but Kossoff was completely fascinated by it. It was actually commissioned in the time of Charles I, so it sort of dates back to that same period in which he was passionate about collecting the Raphael cartoons. And here you've got Kossoff's version, but I think when you see, this is hugely challenging for the weavers to translate. Look at a tiny detail of the Kossoff painting, and that was very much his style, was to use and repaint a canvas multiple times, but to use the oil in such a way that it becomes almost sculptural. And so what happened, I take all the blame, but I sent the weavers down to London in March 2020, which wasn't the perfect month to be in London, as COVID was clearly sort of starting to take hold. And they visited the gallery in which the painting was currently on display. And you can see that they're taking notes. So they have the colour cards for the yarns. They have got the imagery and the paintings with which they're taking information down. And it was an information gathering exercise, because in this instance, Chris's watercolours were allowed to come to the studios, but in this instance, the painting couldn't travel. And this is the warping up process. So you've got the warping up into the shed, which is the thing that separates the warps and allows the weft to go in and out. And this is quite a time-consuming but very important process. And those are cotton warps that we use. There are different strengths of warp, but also if you were looking at tapestry, you have something called warps per inch. So the more warps per inch, the finer the weaving, and arguably the more detail that can be introduced, and therefore the more expensive tapestry in terms of the time that it creates, that it takes to create that. Here again, the process, and just to give you a sense of scale, you've got David there sort of standing on top of the cartoon, and you can see it becomes something rather beautiful in itself. When the tapestry was hung in Edinburgh Park last year, they actually chose to commission us to work on a carpet that is underneath the tapestry, which has uses the cartoon. So that's quite a nice, something sort of quite interesting about the cartoon, I think. Here again, the process of inking on the warps, and then weaving up. And you can see that each warp has to get knotted on at the start, so that the tapestry isn't going to slide, the wefts are not going to slide off the warps when it's cut. And as a structure, tapestry is a weft facing textile. So certainly the tapestries that Dovecot creates. So you don't see the warps. And if you do, they call them sheep because the little bits of white warp that peep through. So that's wouldn't be intentional. And this was right in the midst of the pandemic that we've got visitors in. I think this was in the summer of 2020. And so this was a really important commission. You can see we've got a screen. Normally on a big tapestry like this, you'd have 3 people weaving side by side. Here you've got Naomi and David, but for this particular tapestry, we didn't have so many people on it at the start just because of the restrictions of lockdown. And here you've got the commissioners who came in. Everybody's got their masks on. I think for anyone who loves textile, one of the most brilliant things working at Dovecot is just looking at these fabulous mixes of colour. And that's again something that the weavers are very talented in, blending colours. So you can see how they create mixes with which to interpret the artist's marks. And there's something really terrific about seeing this tapestry because it definitely becomes something completely different to the painting, and I think allows you to both appreciate Kossoff's work, but also there's something really joyous about the tapestry itself. And again, that's the figure of Pax who's coming into view there. It's sort of got a slightly sort of Bloomsbury-esque quality, that sort of early. It was painted by Kossoff in 1987, but actually the quality of the mark making is sort of slightly aesthetic to me that seems more rooted in the early 20th century. There we are, we've got the screen between them. So I'm now just going to take us out for a moment and show us the studio tour. So I just have to click, sorry. So this is something that you can go back to. Oops. That's where the tapestry is in Parabola now. I'm just going to take us into something that we can actually just bear with me. We're going to go into the right. So what you should be able to see in a moment is on the Dovecot website, we have something called the virtual tour. And for every exhibition, we create these Matterports where we take in a camera and it does a 360-degree image capture. And that's what I'm going to show you now. So if you wanted to go back in, you can find this on our website. But just to show you briefly how it works, I'll go full screen. And then you can come out to see the studios with the balcony that is going around the edge. You can do a floor plan of the studios and you can use all of these tools. So that's all on our website. And this was made back in the spring of 2022. So it has various different tapestries that we were working on then. So this tapestry is going to be on show at Dovecot this summer in an exhibition called Scottish Women Artists, but this was a contemporary interpretation of a Joan Erdley painting. And Joan Erdley is a much loved Scottish artist who sadly died very young in her 40s, but her sort of landscapes are seen to almost veer into abstraction. And this is a famous painting of hers that is in the Edinburgh City Art Gallery collection that we wove as a private commission, but it will be on display at Dovecot this summer. Dovecot is about to launch a new apprenticeship, so any of you who might be interested to join us and join the team, if you keep an eye on the website in the next week or so, we will be advertising for an apprentice. And this was the final piece in our most recent apprentice, Elaine Wilson's training, in which she was tasked by the master weaver, Naomi Robertson, to interpret a Turner watercolour that hangs in the collection of the National Galleries of Scotland as part of the Vaughan bequest. And you can see she has her colour strip here, and it's a really, really tiny watercolour. It looks slightly more vivid here than it does. It's actually on display on the balcony at the moment if you get a chance to visit. And then we have some sampling going on this small loom. This is a project to celebrate the Edinburgh 7. It's a tapestry that will be hung in the Futures Institute, the new Futures Institute in Edinburgh, in the spring of 2024. And it's a collaboration with the artist Christine Borland. So we tasked her with coming up with imagery to celebrate the Edinburgh 7. And she's been working with cellular imagery, and it's going to be a very exciting project for you to see early next year. This is more sampling going on for that project. So there's a lot of research that happens on the studio floor, and that's something that we feel is really important for us to encourage. And this is a slightly different process that Dovecot developed in the 1980s to be able to make collaborations and start working with artists in a sort of faster, more immediate way. And this is gun-tufted textile. So this is a work with Jock McFadyen. Rarely do we have the artist's actual painting in the studio, but here we've got his painting of Malig on the northwest coast of Scotland. And you can see yarns. There's a similar process to tapestry with gun tufting in that the cartoon has to be made and the detail inked on. But tapestry, we weave tapestries now from the front of the tapestry. Typically, they were always woven from the back, but in the 20th century, innovators like Sax Shaw and Archie Brennan thought, why couldn't they sit at the front of the tapestry rather than working with mirrors? And here you've got the tufting does work the other way. So it's tufted from the back, and then I can take you behind the back. It's not so tidy, is it, around here? And you can see the different texture of the gun-tufted artwork. Over around the studios, this is the Kossoff. So this is the Kossoff that I showed you being woven on the loom with that imagery of packs. And then if we head up to the end of the studio, this tapestry was a commission with the artist Matt Connors, and this came from his Scottish gallery. And so that's very exciting when we can collaborate with the commercial sector. Sometimes we have to sell our own tapestries to ensure that everybody is working on meaningful projects. And that's a little bit more challenging because we don't have a gallery on Bond Street. So there's always that importance of being able to present the work that we create in the right environment for people to see it and appreciate it, and hopefully to want to acquire it. So we tend to work more on commissions such as this, where the artist or their gallery actually commissions us to make work. So there's a good example of this at the moment just next to me. We're working on a project with Yinka Shonibari, and we've got projects on the loom currently with Victoria Crowe, the artist. We're doing some commemorative tapestries with the Elizabeth Blackadder estate, and about to start working on a new project with Alberta Whittle. So then at the far end of the studios here, we've got the tapestry that was made, the Monarch of the Glen, after the Monarch of the Glen. And this was a collaboration with the artist Peter Saville, who's perhaps best known for his graphic design work. And this tapestry was woven, it's one of a series, and it was woven in the year 2017, which was exactly when the painting by Landseer, Sir Edwin Landseer, was acquired from Diageo by the National Galleries of Scotland, and that's now one of their key attractions, along with the skater, for the Henry Raeburn skater, for people to go and visit in the National Galleries. And yet the painting had inspired Sir Peter Blake to make a version of the monarch for his client Sir Paul McCartney back in the 60s. And then Peter Saville was further inspired to take that imagery and translate it into something much more graphic, which led to the tapestry being commissioned. So it's sort of after, in a bit of a postmodern way. So that's the studio floor, and you can jump into that online and go and look at it you can use your own computers to look at that in any detail. So I'm now going to take us back to look at the presentation. I'm going to just go back into... Great, so hopefully you can see that again. And this is a new, well, this gives you an idea of the tufted work that I showed you with John McFadden. So Gary Fabian Miller is a fine art photographer. He's just had exhibitions at the Arnolfini in Bristol. It just closed last weekend, and has work currently on show at the National Galleries of Wales. And this is his investigation of colour and texture with the studios. He's worked with us for over 10 years. Initially, there was a sample that was woven, and this it was felt that Dovecot needed, in order to do this on a larger scale, to explore working with Gary in the gun-tufted medium first. And so a series of 3 rugs were commissioned called the Hearth Rug series. And Gary's photography uses light sensitive paper. So he is playing with color, and he'll use elements such as glass with which to filter the light onto the zebra paper. But the paper that he uses is no longer produced. And so he's had this sort of crisis of medium, in that his work is literally unable to be produced in the way that he's traditionally explored and experimented. And so he's turned, these are some of his photographs, for example, on the walls, but he has since turned to textile as one media to play with. And here you've got the rugs, and just looking at how the light works with textile and the ends of the yarn. So with tufting, you are cutting the end of the fibre, so you're seeing it sort of fibre on. So it's highly sort of absorbent in terms of light, and how that relates to the impact of his image making in photography. This was actually on display in an exhibition at Dovecot called Colour and Light. And we have a series of the 3. This rug was a unique piece. The other 2 were in an edition of 3. There's actually still one that is available to commission called Gathered Gold Light. And then that led to Dovecot. The project worked very well, and the trust was established with Gary for us to then create this huge tapestry, which is now in a collection in Edinburgh, a commercial collection. And here you've got Gary. We displayed it in an exhibition with him in 2018, and Gary's standing in front of the work. And I think what the weaving team said was unusual is that they'd never seen this sort of reflected colour from a textile before, so the way in which it absorbed. During lockdown, we made 2 more of the hearth rugs while we've got, we were very busy in lockdown, while we've got the costs on the loom here. So we felt it was really important at such a difficult time to ensure that we kept everybody, we sustained everybody, kept the studios working, albeit in a very safe way. I think none of us got COVID until after the worst of the pandemic was over. And this was a new commission with Gary, which you can see on the website of a commercial gallery called Oxford Ceramics. And for this, they commissioned Gary to collaborate with Dovecot on a very different colour palette. So this is looking at these mossy greens, and the work is called As the White Light Gathers Air. And you've got Ben just finishing it off. So once the tufted work is created, it gets shaved, and that is it on display in Oxford Ceramics with the Liz Walmsley and Jim Partridge bench in front of it. So creating that idea of the whole environment. So we looked at the Jock McFadyen on the studio tour. This is a rug that we have produced with Kurt Jackson. So again, the gun-tufted media. And we showed this in COP. Gosh, it was thinking further back. We showed this as part of COP Glasgow last year, when all of the environmental attention was on Scotland. And Grangemouth is famously the oldest distillery, and looks really quite sort of like something out of Blade Runner at night, with the furnace and the smoke and the light. And Kurt Jackson as an artist who is interested in raising the agenda of the environment. That was great to have his work on show, and to also host some delegations while COP was happening in Scotland. Barbara Ray is an artist, again, a bit like Elizabeth Blackadder, who Dovecot has worked with on multiple times. And this is a tapestry with, to an extent, another environmental theme. She has been traveling more recently around the Arctic to take inspiration for her work. She's a very brilliant colorist and painter and printmaker. And this is really a tiny, unique work that Dovecot translated. I'm going to show you the original because it's on a sort of torn paper, which created a problem for the studios in how they put their names onto it. And again, you can see it being cut from the loom. So with the weavers who created it, Naomi Robertson and Ben Heimers, and then we've got Barbara with Dovecot's chairperson, Brian Lang. And so we're back at the studios. Just to let you know what's going on in the building at the moment, I'm going to have a quick look in the chat to see if anybody's asked any questions. So I can't see any questions at the moment, but if you want to pop them in. This is Kaif Bassett, and Dovecot worked on a series of tapestries with Kaif in the early 1990s, while Dovecot was still part of Mount Stewart. Mount Stewart felt that they, the Butte family, were unable to support the studios in the 1990s, and the studios were closed and everyone was made redundant. And then it was a series of philanthropists who felt that the skill of the weavers shouldn't be lost, and they acquired this building with which to move this tapestry studio into, and re-employed all the weavers. And Kaif made those tapestries prior to that, but we currently have an exhibition of his work that we've brought to Scotland from the Fashion and Textile Museum in London, and we're showing not only the tapestries but also Kaif's work in printed textile and lots of both patchworks, quilts that other artists have made using his textiles designs in ways that have inspired him. So that is proving a great hit with our public at the moment, and anyone who comes and visits Dovecot in person is really supporting the studios. So that's in our ground floor galleries. Next, we are opening an exhibition on Scottish women artists. Beatrice Huntington Whiteley here, who was also a famous musician, with her self-portrait. And that opens for the festival this year, a really important moment in Edinburgh. There's a slightly different metabolism to the city here from other cities that I've worked in that August is by far the highest footfall for the city, with everybody coming to the Edinburgh Festival. And this exhibition has allowed us to commission a whole set of new tapestries. So just to sort of show you behind me, we have got, I'll just stand back, you can see in the blue tapestry just on my left shoulder is with Elizabeth Blackadder, and actually Emma Jo, I can duck, is weaving in the studios just behind me at the moment. So gosh, I think I've just jumped ahead with the slides. So thank you for watching. And if you'd like any more information, you're welcome to email us at info@dovecotstudios.com, and I can answer your questions there. And I hope you have a terrific day, and to see you here soon. Take care. Bye-bye.